Alright, so let's dive into the UVs. This is Unfold 3D, so for those of you who haven't used the program, this is going to be a very new interface. It's a standalone program, and I'm just going to go through some of the basic tools I use to UV. I don't use everything in here, just like many other programs, but I'll just show you very quickly how I get a model in here, UV it, and get it out. So we just use OBJs for this program. And before I actually open up the model, I just want to talk a little bit about having control over the UVs. I know there's a lot of places out there, and I've worked at some of them, that have modelers do the UVs and then texture painters pick up the assets with UVs already done. For the most part, that seems to work. However, I'm a firm believer that it's important to have control over your UVs, because ultimately the texture painter is the one that's dictating the texture resolution. And in terms of organization, especially if we get into hard surface assets or even more complicated organic assets, it'll be very important for a texture painter to have control over where he wants to place the UVs, how he wants to organize them, because we are the ones creating not only the textures, but we'll also be creating tileable textures we'll be using a lot. And placing things correctly, especially for tileable textures, is going to be very important, so orientation all works. So everything flows as naturally as possible without a lot of cleanup. So that's my 2 cents on the subject. I think it's imperative for all texture painters to know UVs, to learn how to do them, and understand the best way to organize them. So let's get into it. So as you can see, there's a 3D view and a UV view. I'm going to load an OBJ like so. And here we go. So here's the head. We're not going to be worrying about the armor just yet. We're going to cover that in later down the line in the course. For now, we're only focusing on the eyes and the skin. So it'll be easier for us to think about what we're doing rather than having too much on our plate. So before we actually begin, I want to go over the navigation. So in this program, you don't need to hold down Alt, you don't need to hold down Control or Shift or anything like that. In order to navigate, you just use left, middle, and right mouse buttons. So the left mouse button will pan, you just drag and move. The right mouse button will rotate, and the middle mouse button will zoom in. You can scroll it in. So very, very easy navigational setup. Obviously, it's a little bit different than what you're used to in other programs, but once you start using this program, it becomes very intuitive. So let's get started. I'm going to hide some of the geometry so I can just focus on the mesh of the skin. And if you hold down Tab, it's going to bring up this wheel, this hot wheel, for different selection modes. There's face, there's object, there's vertice, and there's edge. I only use edge mode and object mode. So I very rarely use these two. So I'm going to select the object. I'm going to hold down Shift and click just different objects I want to hide, and then just hit H to hide them. So right now I'm hiding the corneas, the scleras, and the caruncula geo. Like so. There we go. Now I want to start cutting. Now I'm going to cut this up in a traditional way that I would do for any hero character, and then once this is all cut up to my liking, we're going to bring it back into Maya to start organizing it a bit more, and then I can go into more in-depth conversation about texture resolution and how much we want to appropriate for this character himself. But for now, I'm just worried about cutting. So I'm going to bring up the hot wheel and select edge mode. And this is where this program shines. So in this program, there's two different kind of edge selection modes. So if you hold down Alt, it'll get you into the edge selection mode that you can start selecting edges, and you can kind of just select by hand, like so. What's nice is they have this I think what it's called is the shortest point or shortest distance tool. So if I, for instance, if I hit spacebar, that will deselect everything. So to enable this tool, I'm going to hold down Alt, select an edge, and then with Alt held down, I'm just going to drag my mouse. And as you can see, it's finding the shortest distance between the 2 points, which is extremely powerful when you have organic topology. This is very handy. If you don't want that, then if you hit B, as in Brian, that will give you a full edge loop selection, which is again very handy as well. So very quickly you can get edges selected. And then if you hit V as in Victor, that'll get you back to the shortest point. So right now I'm going to hit B for Brian, and I'm just going to do large cuts. And for me, I want to start with cuts around the neck. I typically start with the neck. So I'm going to do something like that. Let's see. Yeah, that seems pretty good for me. I'm going to select that and that. And I'm happy with this cut, so I'm going to hit C for cut. And there we go. I'm going to cut the back of his head and then cut that open. And then I'm going to cut straight down the front. And I'll explain more why I'm cutting it right down the front. Typically we want to try to hide the seams. However, Mari is such a great program, we don't really need to worry about that because we're going to be projection painting anyway. So what I'm most worried about is trying to get the most even flat surfaces as possible. And ultimately I would have to cut this up anyway because I want to maintain the resolution. So I'm going to go back to island mode and just shift select these and hit U, and voila, you see very quickly we're getting these incredible solved pieces. In order to move these, I'm going to hold down the tab key and then drag with island selection mode on. So with island selection mode on, I'm just going to drag this out, and then this brings up a new wheel, which is really cool. It allows you to rotate, move vertically, move horizontally, and then scale. I don't ever use the scale tools because I want everything to be uniform. And then this allows you to rotate all the way around. Very, very cool with holding tab down. So this is a really nice, quick navigational tool to move stuff out of the way. And I'm always hitting spacebar just to deselect. So happy with that. Now before I start cutting up the face, I want to cut out the ears and the nose bags and the mouth bag, just so when we do cut the bigger pieces, it's going to be much easier. So as you can see, this is kind of, topology-wise, is kind of a jungle here. As you can see, the edge loops aren't really conducive for cutting out this ear. So I'm going to resort to the shortest distance tool. So with hitting V for Victor, I'm going to grab, say that one there, and just drag it back. I'm not too worried about how it's selecting. I just want to generally get the general edge shape, like so. As you can see, that's an extremely handy tool. This would take a lot longer if I didn't have this tool here. Happy with that cut, so I'm going to cut that out. And then the first thing I like to do is I cut right down the spine of the ear all the way towards the back. So to make it easier, I'm going to shift select this island because I've already cut it and hit F to frame it. So I can actually frame around it and orbit around it. Go back to edge mode. And let's see if the edge loop works here. So yeah, that works pretty well for me. We got one little edge down here. So I'm just hold down shift and shift select that. And let's cut that. So before I do any more cuts, because this is a really organic shape, I'm going to grab these two islands and solve them. As you can see very quickly, we get some really nice solves. and I'm going to assess this ear before I decide if I want to cut it any further, because usually I like to try to keep this inner ear as intact as possible, because it makes it easier painting in this ear when I want to do masks and stuff and other details. And in order to check the resolution and how it's stretching, I'm going to select this mode here, this checker grid here, and then I'm going to, down in the tile texture tile, I'm just going to increase that like so. And as you can see, this solve is actually pretty good. I'm not so worried about inside the ear here, because we're obviously not going to see it. And if we do see it, we can always just projection paint that section there. But for the most part, this solve is really nice. And I'm actually going to leave it as is. So I'm going to drag these pieces off. Like so. I'm going to go back to wireframe mode. There's other types of wireframe modes that you can do. There's flat shaded, there's regular checker, and there's color checkered. But I typically just stay in this one. It's a bit easier to look at. So good. Happy with that ear, so let's move on to the next one. So I'm going to go back to the shortest distance tool,